Hello everyone. Today we are going to start with the Philosophy of Mind NEP lecture series. To begin with, let us start to know what is the history of philosophy. The history of the philosophy of mind is vast and spans across many cultures and time periods. The philosophy of mind has a rich history, and as we understand, it stretches way back to ancient times and has multiverse cultural and philosophical traditions infused. Here is an overview where we have tried to divide the history of philosophy of mind into certain segments, starting from ancient philosophy to medieval to modern, and we will come to this point as to why modern philosophy amongst all the stages is the most important when we talk about the history of philosophy of mind. Ancient philosophy. When we talk about ancient philosophy, we have to go back to ancient Greece. When we talk about ancient Greece, it is the pre-Socratic philosophers. The early Greek philosophers like Thales and Heraclitus pondered the nature of reality and the mind, often linking it to the cosmos. Plato, for instance, had proposed the theory of forms, suggesting that the mind has access to a realm of abstract, perfect entities. He believed in the immortality of the soul and that knowledge is a recollection of these forms. This is why Plato is called as an idealist, for him ideas are the be-all and end-all, and it is only through ideas that we can gauge these forms. Going ahead, Aristotle viewed that the mind or soul, and just to add as a footnote here, unlike in the West Indian philosophy, Western philosophy doesn't have any distinction between mind and soul. They use it interchangeably. So for Aristotle, who had viewed the mind or soul as the form of the body, integral to a living being's purpose and function, he introduced the concept of the mind as a set of faculties, including perception, imagination, and intellect. When again we had just about mentioned the philosophy of mind history from the ancient Western side, we also need to touch upon from the Indian or the Oriental side. So when we talk about the history of philosophy of mind from the ancient Indian tradition, to begin with, let us talk about the Upanishads. Upanishads are the philosophical texts that explore the nature of the self or Atman and its relationship to the ultimate reality, Brahman, emphasizing inner experience and meditation. Further, we also have the school of Buddhism that, as we all know, was founded by Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha. It introduced the concept of anatta or anatma or no self theory and emphasized mindfulness and meditation to understand the mind's transient nature. Medieval philosophy. When we talk about the history of philosophy of mind, when we touch upon medieval philosophy, we would like to certainly begin with Christian philosophy. Augustine of Hippo integrated Platonic ideas with Christian theology, emphasizing introspection and the inner life of the mind. Thomas Aquinas had further synthesized Aristotelian philosophy with Christian doctrine, discussing the nature of the soul and its faculties. Again, in medieval philosophy, we have the Islamic philosophy. In Islamic philosophy, Avicenna or Ibn Sina developed the sophisticated theories of the soul and intellect, influencing both Islamic and Western medieval thought. Al-Ghazali. Now, Al-Ghazali is one of the most prominent medieval Islamic thinkers, and he has quite a contribution for the history of philosophy of mind. For he critiqued philosophers like Avicenna and emphasized direct mystical experience of the mind and soul. And as we understand, philosophy, the critiques or criticisms are what makes us philosophers. We are not much interested in answers because answers is the domain of scientists, but a philosopher would always like to go beyond, and that is through criticism. And this is precisely why Al-Ghazali is important from this perspective. Now, going ahead, we are coming to the crux of the history of philosophy of mind, which is the early modern period. When we talk about the early modern philosophy, we have to talk about rationalism, and with rationalism comes the iconic Renaissance Cartesius Descartes, or in short, René Descartes. René Descartes had famously declared, "Cogito ergo sum," I think, therefore I am, positing a fundamental distinction between mind and body. He emphasized the mind's role in acquiring knowledge. We have to understand that René Descartes is not only called as the father of modern philosophy, but it is to him that we majorly trace as the genesis for the history of philosophy of mind. This is so because in our Cartesian dualism, his philosophy is also called as Cartesian dualism, for it is picked up from his middle name, which is Renatus Cartesius Descartes. So unlike most of the philosophers' name that is named after their surname, in the case of René Descartes, we call the philosophy as Cartesian philosophy, for it is picked up from his epic middle name, Renatus Cartesius, and so the philosophy Cartesian dualism. I will be talking more on René Descartes in my later segment, for he deserves all the attention here if we are to talk about philosophy of mind. But for now, I would be quickly also mentioning some other important philosophers of mind from the early modern philosophy. Our second philosopher is Baruch Spinoza. Baruch Spinoza had argued for a form of monism, identifying God with nature and viewing the mind and body as two aspects of a single substance. Then after rationalism, the other ism that comes up is empiricism. Empiricism, as we can understand, had hoped or held that all that which is knowledge comes via sense experience, unlike rationalism that talks that whatever is knowledge is through rational thought, rational thinking, ideas. So empiricism, we can clearly say, is the antithesis of rationalism, where they said that it is not really the mind's doing, but it is the perceptual experience, the sensual experience, the sense perception that gives us knowledge per se. Just like René Descartes is called as the father of rationalism, we have John Locke, who is called as the father of empiricism. For John Locke had proposed that the mind at birth is a tabula rasa, a blank slate, and knowledge is only derived when that blank slate communicates with the external world vis-a-vis experience. Following John Locke, we have Bishop Berkeley, also called as George Berkeley, who had argued that the material world exists only in the perceptions of minds, a view known as idealism. The third empiricist thinker is David Hume. David Hume had emphasized the empirical basis of knowledge and the role of impressions and ideas in the mind, questioning the existence of a permanent self. Further ahead, when we talk about the 19th and early 20th century, if we are to see the German idealism, we have to pick up from Immanuel Kant. Immanuel Kant had argued that the mind plays an active role in structuring experience, proposing a complex interaction between sensory input and mental faculties. Further, Hegel had developed a dialectical method to explore the development of mind and consciousness within historical and social contexts. Further, we have also the most celebrated phenomenology and before that pragmatism of the 19th and early 20th century, which needs to be touched upon when we talk about the history of philosophy of mind. Under pragmatism, William James, who is also known as the founder of pragmatism, had emphasized the practical aspects of mental processes and introduced the concept of the stream of consciousness. In phenomenology, Edmund Husserl is largely celebrated as the founder of phenomenology, focusing on the structures of consciousness and the intentionality of mental states. All these philosophers had in some way or the other talked about mind in various ways. Some had talked about the deliberations of mind with the world, some had talked about entirely mind being the superhero, some had mentioned about the structures of the mind, but in all, each one of them are extremely important when we are talking about the history of philosophy of mind. Also, quickly, we have to mention about Sigmund Freud when we are talking about philosophy of mind, though I would want to make it very clear that philosophy of mind and psychology barely has any connection. For many people presume that philosophy of mind is nothing but psychology. But yes, there is a domain or discipline called psychoanalysis where Sigmund Freud is the harbinger of this theory, and it is important at this juncture when we are talking about the 19th and early 20th century that we mention the psychoanalysis method of Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud had developed a theory of the mind based on unconscious processes, introducing concepts like the id, id, ego and superego. Late 20th century to present times. Analytic philosophy. Gilbert Ryle, who had critiqued Cartesian dualism and introduced the concept of category mistake, viewing mental states as dispositions to behave in certain ways. Wittgenstein had emphasized the importance of language in understanding the mind, shifting focus to the public, social nature of mental phenomena. Cognitive science and neuroscience. The development of cognitive science in the mid-20th century integrated insights from philosophy, psychology, linguistics and artificial intelligence to study the mind. And this did become a huge hit, especially during the late 20th century to present, and even today, as we know, we are surrounded by AI. So this is where philosophy of mind has a huge role when we connect the theme philosophy of mind with artificial intelligence. Advances in neuroscience have increasingly informed philosophical debates about the mind-brain relationship. Contemporary debates of the present, topics such as consciousness, intentionality, mental causation and the nature of mental representation continue to be the central themes in philosophy of mind. So now that we have studied the history of philosophy of mind, if we are asked that, well, what does philosophy of mind contain or what is the subject matter of philosophy of mind, we can safely say that philosophy of mind deals with themes of consciousness, of intentionality, of mental causation, nature of mental representation and so on and so forth. Emerging fields like neurophilosophy and philosophy of artificial intelligence explore the implications of technological and scientific advancements for understanding the mind. So the history of the philosophy of mind is marked by evolving views on the nature of the mind, its relationship to the body, and its role in our understanding of the world, reflecting broader changes in philosophical, scientific and cultural contexts. Now that we have had a view about the history of philosophy of mind, we had also then tried to take away the takeaway of what is the theme of philosophy of mind. I am interested in also mentioning, or rather clarifying, that this theme or this paper, which is called as philosophy of mind, is definitely significant, and there is barely any paper which is called as philosophy of body, because for the following reasons. So the theme right now is, why is it called as philosophy of mind and not something like philosophy of body? The philosophy of mind is a branch of philosophy that studies the nature of the mind, mental events, mental functions, mental properties, consciousness, and their relationship to the physical body, particularly the brain. So the key questions include: what is the nature of the mind and consciousness? How do mental states such as belief and desires relate to physical states? What is the nature of perception, thought, and emotion? It addresses issues such as the mind-body problem, how the mind relates to the body, the nature of consciousness, the existence of free will, and the nature of mental states. The term philosophy of mind is used instead of philosophy of body because it focuses on understanding the nature and properties of the mind, mental phenomena, and consciousness. The body, particularly the brain, is studied in relation to how it supports and interacts with mental processes, but the primary concern is understanding the mind itself. The body is considered within this context, but the emphasis is on the mental aspects rather than the physical, and this is precisely why there is emphasis on philosophy of mind over philosophy of body. Philosophy of mind seeks to answer questions about the nature of mental states, the relationship between the mind and the brain, the nature of consciousness and self-awareness, how mental states influence behavior. In contrast, philosophy of body would imply a primary focus on the physical aspects of human existence, such as the nature of the body and its functions, which is typically the domain of disciplines like biology, physiology, medicine, rather than philosophy. So this is why we emphasize on philosophy of mind over philosophy of body. Now, with René Descartes, as I had mentioned in the introduction of the history of philosophy of mind, is the superhero when we try to trace historically the debate of philosophy of mind. So with René Descartes starts the practice of what we can assert as the historicity of philosophy of mind. This is not to say, I'm repeating again, that there was no trace of philosophy of mind earlier. We had already seen the entire points about ancient times and medieval times, but yes, when we talk about philosophy of mind, it is with René Descartes that we begin. But with Descartes, the systematic process started. René Descartes' famous dictum, cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am, is the result of a series of arguments he made in his quest for certainty. However, he didn't arrive at cogito ergo sum just like that. The first stoppage was dubito ergo sum, or I doubt therefore I am. Dubito ergo sum continued to be the maxim for a very long time, and then slowly cogito ergo sum came up. So if we are to understand how he had reached to cogito ergo sum, we need to delve into the bridge of dubito ergo sum, and to even understand why did he come to dubito ergo sum, we have to read or talk or mention or discuss the three key arguments that led him to this conclusion. The first argument is the method of doubt, which is also called as hyperbolic doubt. Descartes sought to establish a firm foundation for knowledge by systematically doubting everything he could possibly doubt. He said that whatever seems to be given to me are dubious, and he explains why they are dubious. Firstly, he picks up the sensory deception. Descartes noted that our senses, what is our senses? Our touch, our sight, our hearing, our taste, our auditory, gustatory. He says that all these sensory perceptions are those that sometimes deceive us. For example, objects far away may appear smaller than they are, and straight sticks partially submerged in water looks bent. If our senses can deceive us sometimes, how can we trust them entirely? Further, he also talks about something what he calls as the dream argument. He argued that there is no definite sign to distinguish between being awake and dreaming. Well, all of us could simply be dreaming that COVID has ended and we are here watching this philosophy of mind lecture series. Who knows, maybe this is just one grand dream. We have vivid dreams that seem real while we are experiencing them. If we can be deceived into believing in a reality while dreaming, how can we be certain about our waking experiences? This is the second part of the method of doubt argument. The third is the evil demon hypothesis. Descartes imagined a powerful malicious demon that could deceive him about everything, including mathematics and logic. For remember, René Descartes is primarily a mathematician. The hypothetical scenario pushed his doubt to the extreme, making him question the very basis of his knowledge. So he says, what if? What if this entire thought process that I verify as knowledge is maybe the evil game of some malicious demon? Maybe, just maybe, 2 plus 2 for you and me is 4, but maybe it is the demon's trick who is doing it. So how do we even question, or how do we even ascertain that the field of mathematics, the field of logic is real? Through this method of doubt, Descartes arrived at the point where he doubted everything he could, but he realized that the very act of doubting required a doubter. This led him to dubito ergo sum, I doubt, therefore I am, which means that I have realized vis-a-vis my sense perception, vis-a-vis my dream argument, vis-a-vis my demon argument, that the very knowledge is dubitable. So all that I am sure of is the process of doubting, for the rest is all dubitable. So the only thing that I am certain of that my mind is capable of doing is doubting. So if I am sure of doubting, along with doubting, who comes? The doubter, the person who is doubting. And this made him pronounce the dictum, I doubt, therefore I am. The second argument from his series, where he ended up arriving at cogito ergo sum, is the indubitability of self-awareness. The argument that René Descartes had given was, having doubted everything, Descartes searched for something that cannot be doubted, the doubting process. He recognized that while he could doubt the existence of the physical world, the existence of other minds and even mathematical truths, he could not doubt that he was doubting. The very act of doubting presupposes a thinking subject. So that made him come up with something which is called as self-awareness. The realization that doubt itself is a form of thought led Descartes to understand that as long as he is thinking, he must exist. This thinking includes not just doubting, but also understanding, affirming, denying, willing, imagining, and feeling. Now, if we understand, doubting is only one of the acts of mind, or rather, the subsets of the mind. The mind also does a lot of other activities like understanding, affirming, calculating, denying, willing, imagining, feeling, hoping. So, the mind is the superset and all these are subset. And he thought that it is only logical to replace the subset doubting here with the superset mind, and this leads him to his indubitable self-awareness, the awareness that he is thinking, to the formulation of cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am. The act of thinking itself is confirmed his existence. Please understand again, now that we have understood how René Descartes had arrived at the theory of cogito ergo sum vis-a-vis dubito ergo sum, there is also this pointer about clarity and distinctness that comes again and again in his work throughout the meditations. A quick analysis on something which is on clarity and distinctness. What is this clarity and distinctness? Let us address. So we will see how these two important concepts are carried out in our next segment. Thank you.